Hi, my name is Nicki Ward, and I'm a poet. Uh, One of I think, the only way we can learn about poetry, or only I can learn about poetry, is by studying other poets. And one way of studying it is by mechanically breaking down a poem academically. For a whole host of reasons, that doesn't work for me. I just not built that way. And secondly, most of the academic studies of the poems that I love, or at least the poems I love and respect, I don't understand the way these are academically broken down. They don't, the breakdowns don't reveal more truth to me, or more about what the poet was trying to achieve. Maybe that's something to do with me, or maybe that's something to do with the process of learning and regurgitating about poetry. It's a bit like deconstructing a joke, right? Nobody laughs, or nobody laughs. The joke loses its humor when you deconstruct it too much. So I don't love doing that. But what I do like doing is recitation, and learning everything I can about the poet and where the poet came from, and the poem itself and the context of the time, to get a better sense of what maybe they were trying to say. And that teaches me a whole lot. And the challenge I've set myself is to do that research and then put it here and now put it out there. Someone has very kindly suggested that I take a run at John Milton's poem called Colloquially on His Blindness. Now, Milton never described it in any such terms, nor do I think he would have. On my blindness is just so on the nose, and possibly not what the poem is about. It's the opening line is, "When I consider how my light is spent," and that's an investigation of how can you serve your maker, the divine inspiration that comes to poets, when one of your key skills have been taken away. And then the ending of the poem comes to a resolution about that. And it talks like Helen Keller said, or is said to have, is quoted as saying, "I would rather lack sight than vision," which is rather telling. And I think Milton, in a way, comes to the same kind of conclusion, that yes, he may lack sight, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have vision, and it doesn't mean that he can't bear witness to the work of God as he perceived God. So, so that's why I do these deep dives in recitations. One of the first things I do in a study is to try and figure out where the poet is from, to see if there are some clues, if they are from, let's say, the north of England or the south of England, or from America or Australia or some other country, and where that would inform the musicality behind the poem, the internal music of it. People in, for example, in Wales, in the west of Great Britain, have a great deal of musicality to it, and a lilting way of talking. And so if you're going to recite Dylan Thomas, even though Dylan Thomas did not actually speak Welsh as a native, it was inspired by the music of that area. Similarly with poets from the north of England or the Midlands. Well, Milton was born in the south of England, London, but it was, 400 years ago, or plus or minus, and accents change over time. Even today in England, the accent is much more Americanized because of the influence of American popular culture. And so the accents of today are not the same as the accents of 50 years ago. And 400 years from now, who knows how they will have shifted. So that's a bit of a challenge, but we can take a few guesses. He is of the same time and ilk of Shakespeare, and it's likely that he would have had a similar kind of accenting to that of Shakespeare, even though Shakespeare was from Oxford and Milton from London. They were contemporaneous. Oxford accent is sort of got over. It's sort of slightly Welsh, slightly West Country lilt to it. And there's some very good studies on how Shakespeare might be recited with OP, original pronunciation, as opposed to RP, received pronunciation. Story for another day. But that's all. Those are all, wild guesses. Well, not wild guesses, informed guesses, shall we say. The other thing that is important is that the language itself has shifted over time. And so some of the words that are in this poem don't mean the same thing as they did back then. And some of them are pretty bloody important to understanding what the poem is about. The first is, when I consider how my light is spent. Now, forgive me if this is obvious to you. I did look it up because I wanted to be absolutely sure I understood. In this sense, it's not how my light is spent, how it is doled out like money, as in spending money. It is how my light is spent, exhausted. This is a resource that is completely depleted. That's a very different meaning. Although, who knows, there might be some element of that expenditure idea in there as well. But principally it means it's exhausted. There's no light left. The second part is in the middle of the poem, where Milton asks God, doth God exact day labour light denied? I fondly ask. What does that mean, I fondly ask? It seems rather, in today's language, sounds a little passive-aggressive. I ask God fondly, what the hell? But in the context of the time, fondly here is a slightly more archaic meaning, and fondly means foundational, on a very basic level, same root as the word foundation. A good definition would be naively. So when I fondly ask, I naively ask. It means something quite different if you go to the more modern definition of fondness. And then finally, of course, there is the oft-quoted last line, which is, they also serve who only stand and wait. Now, there's a couple of ways of understanding wait. Wait meaning as in waiting for a train, where you're just sitting around motionless, and then waiting as in a waiter, to be in attendance, to bear witness. And it's in the second meaning that I think Milton is clearly shooting for here, this to stand and watch, to bear witness to the works of one's maker. That's the takeaway of this. This is what the poem is about, that the punchline, the vaulter, to use a technical term, the vaulter where you pole vault, you vault into the final understanding. What is revealed is that they also serve only stand and wait. Being a witness to God's work, regardless of who your God is itself a noble and worthwhile endeavor. And it should be enough. If you are genuinely right-sized or humble, it should be enough. At least that's what Milton is saying here. So we've covered where he's from, the times that he lived in. I could go on. I've done a huge amount of research on this, about how he was a bureaucrat, how many languages he knew. A huge linguist. Greek, Latin, of course, as an educated man, English, Old English, Dutch, Italian, Spanish, French, of course. So hugely literate and linguistically gifted artist. So none of these choices are accidental, and he's experimenting with what at the time was a newly emerging language. English was really coming into its early force in the 1600s, shifting from Old English. And this was with the advent of printing technology, which was the internet of its time. And the establishment of English as a legitimate cultural language was a new thing. English is not rhyme rich. Latinate or Italian or Spanish or French have word endings that match up very neatly. Regardez, voulez, cherchez, all the verb endings line up a. And so it's really easy to line up rhymes. And if you're trying to translate a classical poetic form, like an Italian sonnet, which this is based on, then finding those rhyme endings that work, not so easy. It's really difficult to get the rhyme endings and the line endings to line up at the same time, if that makes sense. And so what we end up seeing in Miltonian sonnets, or English sonnets in general, is a thing called enjambment, where the end of the line is where you punch the rhyme. When I consider how my light is spent, to serve therewith my maker and present. Okay, those are the line endings, but they are not the end of the sentences. If you're tracing the line down the sentence, the The end of the sentence may be the middle of the next line. This makes it tricky as hell to recite in a way that is meaningful. Do you punch the last word on the line, or do you punch the end? You put the emphasis in at the end of the sentence to make that work. One of the gifts that we get on the flip side with the English language, although it is a rhyme-poor language, is that rhythmically it's terribly interesting. And that's how we can, I think do some good work with this. There's some choices that we can make on this poem. Some will be to punch the end line, but some will be to punch the end of the sentence so the sense carries through. If you're looking for more neutral or indexed readings, then I'd strongly recommend Spoken Verse as a resource on the YouTube of thousands, certainly hundreds, possibly thousands of amazing poems read by a performer called Tom O'Bedlam. And his readings are how do I describe them? Well, first, they're excellent, but they are deliberately neutral. I think his ambition was to index poetic works, to provide an encyclopedia of recitation that had a kind of a neutral interpretation. It definitely succeeds in that regard, but occasionally at the expense of comprehension and feel. That was a deliberate choice on his part, undoubtedly. Very gifted performer who could do just about anything he wanted vocally. But yeah, tremendously respectful. That said, there aren't that many good recitations of this poem out there, and there are many, many bad ones. I'm just hoping this isn't one of them. I have no doubt somebody will tell me in the commentary underneath. I've made some choices. The choices are deliberate. Whether they are correct or not, no one can say. But I will say that they're well considered on my part. That I've thought about where to place emphases and how how the scansion might work with this. And they are, yeah, and hopefully you'll get something new out of this poem. And I encourage you to recite it yourself. Figure out how it would make sense to you. All right, enough yattering from me. I suppose I should just get on with reciting the thing. And with all of this long lead up, it better be halfway decent. So thank you for your indulgence on this one. And forgive me, I'm just going to pull the text down so I don't miss it over here. It's just slightly off camera, so I apologize for the loss of line of sight. When I consider how my light is spent ere half my days in this dark world and wide, and that one talent which is death to hide lodged with me useless, though my soul more bent to serve therewith my Maker and present my true account, lest he returning chide. Doth God exact day labour, light denied? I fondly ask. But patience, to prevent that murmur, soon replies, God does not need either man's work or his own gifts. Who best bear his mild yoke, they serve him best. His state is kingly. Thousands at his bidding speed, and post o'er land and ocean without rest. They also serve, who only stand and wait.